Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going back to ancient Rome, but this time we're focusing on its military history. We're going to be looking at how conflicts on the fringes of the empire could have massive ripple effects across all of Europe.
It's true. Sometimes these seemingly small-scale skirmishes ended up influencing the fate of Rome itself. It's a great reminder that you can't understand the big picture without looking at the smaller details. And that's what we're going to do today.
Exactly. We'll break down these battles, figure out why they mattered, and see how they contributed to Rome's eventual decline.
I think a good starting point is the reign of Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yeah, Marcus Aurelius, known for his philosophy more than his military prowess.
Right. But his reign was anything but peaceful. He was constantly dealing with threats from the east and west.
Like the Parthians and the Germanic tribes.
Exactly. But before we jump into those conflicts, I think it's worth mentioning that Aurelius shared power with his brother Lucius Verus.
Yeah, that's pretty unique for Roman emperors, wasn't it? I mean, was that just Aurelius being all philosophical, or was there more practical reason?
Probably a bit of both. You have to remember that being Roman emperor wasn't like being a king. Their authority wasn't absolute. It relied a lot on military prestige and the support of the legions.
So sharing the burden of leadership, particularly with enemies on multiple fronts, makes sense.
Exactly. And while Lucius Verus was a loyal co-ruler, he wasn't exactly power-hungry. He kind of took a backseat and unfortunately died from the Antonine Plague before Aurelius.
The Antonine Plague. It's incredible how a disease could have such a massive impact on history.
Absolutely. Millions died. It weakened the Roman army, disrupted trade, and probably even contributed to social unrest. And this was all happening while Aurelius was trying to deal with the Parthians in the east.
Speaking of the Parthians, what exactly caused that war?
Well, essentially it was retaliation. The Parthians had been making incursions into Armenia and Syria, which were key Roman provinces. Aurelius and Lucius Verus decided to launch a counteroffensive.
And that led to the capture of Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital.
Right.
That was a pretty decisive victory.
It was. They sacked Ctesiphon in 165 AD, but that victory came at a huge cost. This is likely where the Roman army contracted the Antonine Plague. Just imagine legions devastated not by enemy soldiers, but by a disease.
Chilling. And Lucius Verus was one of the casualties.
He died in 169 AD, leaving Aurelius to rule alone. But the problems didn't stop there. The plague continued to ravage the empire for years, weakening its defenses.
A double whammy. So while the east was on fire, what was happening with the Germanic tribes up north?
They were a constant problem. A good example is the Marcomannic War, which started in 166 AD. The Marcomanni, a powerful tribe along the Danube River, launched a massive attack into Roman territory.
And this war was brutal and dragged on for years, didn't it?
For over 15 years, imagine the strain on the Roman army already weakened by the plague. Aurelius spent years campaigning on the Danube frontier fighting these warriors.
They eventually made peace, but I bet it was a tense one.
Definitely, Aurelius never fully trusted the Marcomanni. He saw them as a major threat and started planning a preemptive strike to finish them off once and for all.
But then the Antonine Plague returned.
Exactly. In 180 AD, as he was preparing for his campaign, Aurelius died from the plague, a real turning point for the empire.
Before we get into that, I'd love to hear more about Rome's attempt to contact ancient China.
Ah, yes. The almost connection between these two great empires at opposite ends of the world.
Exactly. It's amazing to think about. So let's set the scene. Silk had become a huge fad in Rome, right? Arriving all the way from the east via the Silk Road.
Oh, yeah. It was the ultimate luxury item. Roman emperors and their wives draped in silk. It was a symbol of wealth and status.
But Aurelius wasn't interested in silk, was he? I read that he was more interested in Han Dynasty steel.
That's right. Roman historians raved about its quality, said it could pierce any obstacle. Aurelius saw its military potential.
He wanted to get his hands on that super steel for his legions. That would have been a game changer.
For sure. So in 165 AD, right in the middle of the Parthian War, Aurelius sent an envoy to China.
Wow. By sea, I imagine, since the land routes were blocked.
You got it. And believe it or not, they actually made it. Chinese records show the envoy arrived in the Han capital and even met with Emperor Huan himself.
And they brought gifts, which totally flopped.
Right. The gifts were considered worthless by the Han court. It's not clear why. Maybe bad instructions from Aurelius' corrupt officials swapping out valuable stuff, or just a complete misjudgment of what the Han would find impressive. Whatever the reason, the mission failed.
What a missed opportunity. Just imagine those two empires joining forces.
It's a fascinating thought, but unfortunately, both empires were already on a downward trajectory. But that's a story for another time. For now, we need to return to Rome and the drama unfolding within Aurelius' own family.
Oh boy. This can't be good.
Let's just say Aurelius's wife Faustina the Younger wasn't exactly the virtuous woman he praised in his writings. Behind closed doors, she was having affairs.
Talk about a contrast. And that must have raised some eyebrows about the legitimacy of Aurelius's heir Commodus.
You bet. There were rumors that Commodus wasn't actually Aurelius's son, true or not. Those rumors really hurt his reputation. And to make matters worse, he was totally unprepared to rule an empire.
I've heard Commodus described as a spoiled brat who was more interested in gladiatorial games than governing.
Pretty accurate. And when Aurelius died, Commodus immediately abandoned his father's conquests in the north. He made peace with the Germanic tribes and rushed back to Rome.
That's like throwing away your father's legacy. It sounds like we're about to enter a very different chapter of Roman history. Something more like the movie Gladiator than a philosophy book.
Well, remember that Gladiator takes some liberties with history, but it does capture the essence of Commodus's reign. Paranoia, self-indulgence, and instability.
I'm ready to dive into that chaos, but I think we'll save it for our next installment. But welcome back. So Commodus is back in Rome, ditching his dad's campaigns. I'm guessing the legions weren't too thrilled about that.
Yeah, not a great look, especially for a new emperor. But his problems went way beyond popularity. His reign was basically a string of bad decisions and a total disconnect from reality.
So how did it all fall apart for him? Was it a sudden collapse or a slow burn?
More like a slow unraveling, a series of blunders and power struggles. It's important to note that Commodus wasn't some inherently evil figure. He was a product of his environment, thrown into a role he wasn't ready for.
Growing up as the son of Marcus Aurelius must have been intense. Did Commodus even try to follow in his father's footsteps? Or did he go in a totally different direction?
Oh, he went in a completely different direction. Commodus had zero interest in politics or military strategy. He was all about spectacle, the trappings of power, not the responsibility. He saw himself as a god emperor like Hercules, obsessed with gladiatorial combat and extravagant games.
And how did the Roman Senate, those powerful senators, react to all this?
They were freaking out. They saw Commodus as reckless and irresponsible, a threat to the empire's stability. And he made it worse by appointing unqualified buddies to important positions and basically looting the treasury. He was ignoring the very institutions that made Rome strong.
A recipe for disaster. So you have a leader who's more interested in personal glory than governing, and a growing rift between him and the ruling class.
Precisely. And Rome's enemies noticed. They saw Commodus's weakness as an opportunity. The Germanic tribes who Aurelius had kept in check started testing the waters again.
It's amazing how internal problems can cripple a nation's defenses.
Right.
Did anyone try to control Commodus? Or was everyone too scared?
There were attempts, but they usually backfired. His own sister, Lucilla, even tried to have him assassinated in 182 AD.
Whoa, family drama. What was her motivation?
Power and resentment. She was married to Lucius Verus Aurelius' co-ruler, and she felt her family deserved more power. The plot failed, and Lucilla was executed.
Talk about a dysfunctional family.
Right.
So Commodus survives this assassination attempt. Did it make him more paranoid and isolated?
Absolutely. The failed plot deepened his distrust of everyone. He became super reliant on the Praetorian Guard, his personal bodyguards. That reliance would come back to haunt the empire later.
I can see where this is going. A paranoid emperor depending on a small elite force for protection. Classic setup for a coup.
You got it. But before we get to that, we need to talk about just how out of touch Commodus became. He spent fortunes on public games and spectacles, basically bankrupting the empire. He also thought he was a gladiator, fighting in the arena.
I've heard stories about him fighting exotic animals, even killing a giraffe.
Those stories might be exaggerated, but they show his obsession with spectacle and his total disregard for his position. As he played gladiator, the empire was crumbling. Provinces neglected treasury, empty corruption everywhere.
Not exactly a golden age. So how did Commodus's reign end?
How it began, with violence and chaos. In 192 AD, he was assassinated by a group of conspirators, including his mistress and a Praetorian prefect. His death plunged Rome into a year of turmoil and bloodshed, the year of the 5 emperors.
5 emperors in 1 year? That sounds insane. How did the empire even function?
It barely did. It was a total free-for-all, with everyone fighting for the throne. The Praetorian Guard, used to wielding power behind the scenes, played a key role in all the chaos.
And I'm guessing this created the perfect opportunity for a new strongman to emerge.
Exactly. Out of this mess rose Septimius Severus, a North African general who crushed his rivals and seized control. He established the Severan Dynasty, a new chapter in Roman history.
Okay, Septimius Severus sounds like a game changer. He takes over after all this chaos, a military man through and through. But you said his rise had a huge impact on the Roman military, and not in a good way. Tell me more.
Severus was a brilliant strategist and politician. He understood military power maybe even more than previous emperors. He saw the Praetorian Guard as both a tool and a threat. He was determined to reshape the army to fit his needs and ambitions.
I bet his experience during the Year of the Five Emperors shaped his view of the military. So how did he reform the army? And what were the consequences?
That's a great question, and one that leads us to the true beginning of Rome's decline. But let's save that for next time.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our Roman adventure. Last time we left off with Septimius Severus taking control after the crazy Year of the Five Emperors. You were saying that his rise and his military reforms really set the stage for Rome's decline.
Severus was an interesting guy. He wasn't actually born in Rome. He was from Rome in North Africa. And that kind of outsider status always made him feel a little insecure. He needed to prove himself, show everyone he was strong and in charge. And for Severus, that meant controlling the army.
So it wasn't enough to just be emperor. He needed to make sure the legions were totally loyal. What did he do to consolidate his power?
One of his first moves was to get rid of the Praetorian Guard. The same guys who had been pulling the strings during the Year of the Five Emperors, he saw them as too powerful, too corrupt, too involved in politics.
That's a bold move. Disbanding the emperor's own bodyguard, what did he replace them with?
He created a new Praetorian Guard, bigger and completely loyal to him personally. He filled it with soldiers from his own legions, men who had fought alongside him. But that wasn't all. He also stationed a legion right outside of Rome in Italy itself.
Wait a minute, didn't the Romans have a rule against stationing legions in Italy? Wasn't that seen as a way of intimidating the Senate?
You're right, it was a huge break with tradition. And a pretty clear signal to the Senate that Severus was calling the shots. Like he was saying, don't mess with me, I'm not afraid to use force.
So Severus is tightening his grip on the military. He's breaking with tradition. But what about the average soldier? Did Severus's reforms affect their lives? Or was this just a power play at the top?
Severus knew that to stay in power, he needed the army on his side. So he made sure to keep them happy. He increased their pay, gave them more benefits, and even let them loot conquered territories.
Keeping the troops happy with plunder and bonuses sounds like he's turning the Roman army into a bunch of mercenaries. Not exactly the disciplined legions of old.
You're picking up on something important. Severus wanted loyalty, but his policies had unintended consequences. The army started caring more about getting rich than serving the empire. Discipline went downhill, and the focus shifted from defending Rome's borders to lining their own pockets.
And that's what you see as the real start of Rome's decline, this shift in military culture, this focus on personal gain over duty.
Exactly. Commodus, for all his faults, hadn't really changed the structure of the army. He damaged its reputation and wasted its resources, but he didn't break its spirit. Severus, though, he accidentally created a monster, an army that was loyal to him, but not necessarily loyal to Rome itself.
A good reminder that even the best intentions can backfire, especially when you're messing with something as complex as the military.
Absolutely. And speaking of unintended consequences, let's talk about Severus's sons, Caracalla and Geta. They were supposed to rule together after their father's death in 211 AD, but things didn't go as planned.
I'm sensing another power struggle coming on.
You got it. Caracalla was just as ruthless and ambitious as his dad. He wasn't sharing power with anyone, especially not his own brother. In 212 AD, he had Geta murdered and took control of the empire.
So Caracalla eliminates his rivals and inherits an army that's been reshaped by his father's reforms. What does he do with all this power?
He keeps appeasing the army, like his father did, further weakening the traditional values of discipline and service. But then he makes a decision that seems generous at first, but actually ends up hurting the empire even more.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What was this supposed act of generosity?
In 212 AD, Caracalla issues the Constitutio Antoniana, also known as the Edict of Caracalla. This edict gave Roman citizenship to almost everyone living in the empire.
That sounds like a good thing, right? Expanding citizenship? Giving more people a stake in the empire? Wouldn't that make people feel more united and loyal?
That was the idea, but it didn't really work out that way. The Roman bureaucracy was already struggling after years of war and plague. It just couldn't handle millions of new citizens. All that paperwork and record keeping, it was a logistical nightmare.
Like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. The system just wasn't built for that kind of change.
Exactly. The Edict of Caracalla was meant to be a good thing, but it overloaded an already broken system. It also kind of cheapened the value of Roman citizenship, which had always been something special.
Like a super exclusive club that suddenly opens its doors to everyone. It loses its appeal.
Perfect analogy. And that loss of exclusivity had real consequences. Roman citizens used to have special legal protections and rights. When everyone became a citizen, those rights became weaker. and Roman society became more uniform, but also less dynamic.
So we've come a long way.
Hmm.
From Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, to Septimius Severus, the military pragmatist, to Caracalla, the emperor who tried to buy loyalty with citizenship and ended up fracturing the empire even more. What a journey.
It really shows how leadership decisions, even those made with good intentions, can have unforeseen ripple effects. It makes you think about the forces that shape empires and the challenges of maintaining power.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the late Roman Empire. We'll be back soon with another fascinating chapter from history. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious.